Hello there.
The cinema courtroom is now in session.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back to the Cinema Courtroom Show, a podcast where your favorite blockbusters await trial from every cinematic universe with your host and galactic judge, Makram Mark. Do not forget to like in order to assist the complex algorithm and get my podcast out there, and subscribe on whatever streaming platform that you're listening to, whether it be Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. Because listen, every click on the icon counts. Don't forget to ring the notification bell loud and clear, and share this podcast with your friends, family, cat, dog, whomever. We do not discriminate. Now, without further ado, let us begin with our review topic, Goodfellas.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Goodfellas is a biographical film that is based on a true story about Henry Hill, an American mobster up to no good. The synopsis of the movie is as follows. Henry Hill, with his friends Jimmy and Tommy, begins to climb from being a petty criminal to a gangster on the mean streets of New York. Now that I've got the synopsis of Goodfellas out of the way, so you could better understand the context, it should go without saying that the general audience immediately gets a grasp of what kind of movie Goodfellas is. It is a movie about New York mobsters. It also goes into the most dauntless heist in history. My review for Goodfellas will be based on the following elements. The plot of the movie. Again, the plot is based on a non-fictional story. The editing of Goodfellas. The color grading and frames. Acting and performances. Whether or not Goodfellas is an engaging movie altogether. And finally, we will together determine the final verdict of this following question. Would one watch Goodfellas again? First off, the plot for Goodfellas can be summarized by the first act opening of the movie. Henry, who is narrating the story, explicitly outlines his motive to be a gangster. Everyone else is functioning with sad lives, wrestling with the idea of consolidating a living, whereas the life of crime would theoretically give you an increased income and more respect because you're the indestructible gangster, you know? And no one's going to mess with you. While this narration has a lot of exposition and less of the show not tell elements, an over excessive exposition feast, if you will, I still think that the plot of Goodfellas does a good job of making it seem like the narrator is reading you a novel. The plot for Goodfellas gives you a sense of what was once conceived to be a quote-quote American dream, but is in reality a true story of pure American chaos, an American nightmare, no dreams. And being a part of the gangster lifestyle makes the chances of you getting a whole lot of respect or getting shot in the face with a gun an equal possibility. There is no middle ground. You get respected or shot. This is, a concept that Goodfellas, the plot of it, emphasize. Not to mention, the characters in Goodfellas are not virtuous people. They lie, steal, kill, and throughout the movie, there is a scene where Henry is also seen gaslighting his wife, who had some valid concerns. He gets aggressive, he cheats on her. The moment Henry is let out of prison, Henry is back in the game. Some definite valid concerns to be had on Karen's part, because of all that Henry is doing. Even though Karen does get psychotic at times. Not to mention, her name is Karen. And bad luck is associated with anyone who's called Karen. That's a joke. But the character development and evolution of Henry Hills is also explicit in the plot of Goodfellas. Henry Hills goes from a boy who is making a simple living by making errands to a trusted figurehead of a big mafia organization in his late 20s. And I think that is really how every director should structure a true story into a 3-act screenplay. It would have been very odd if the movie just began with Henry and his gangster lifestyle already. It is the job of a movie to create a compelling plot and utilize creative license to spice up the story a bit. At the same time, preserve the audience investment into the protagonist, even while the protagonist descends to insanity, even while the protagonist does questionable things. The protagonist's job is to make you invested into what they're doing, and maybe even root for them, even though what they're doing is immoral. But that's the effect of good storytelling. You're just lost in the moment. Now, before I move on to the editing of Goodfellas, I want to talk about another thing that I liked about the plot. There is an indication of Jewish and Italian prejudice in that one scene, where Tommy asks Henry to, help him sleep with a Jewish broad. And then he says something along the lines of, in this day and age, a Jew broad is prejudiced against Italians. Okay, now, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to bring up that scene because it's one of the most funny scenes of the movie, in my opinion. What do you mean by funny? Funny how? I know you might get that reference because chances are that you watched the movie. And if you didn't and just like listening to spoilers, I'm basically making a couple of references to some iconic moments of Goodfellas. You would have to watch the movie in order to appreciate it. References aside, let's move on to the second thing, shall we? The second thing I want to touch on is the editing of Goodfellas, with the color grading and freeze frames. When I sat down to watch this movie, I recognized something with the color grading that stood out to me, because I noticed that there were shades of red color grading as Henry, Tommy, and Jimmy were digging up Billy Bats. It's almost like you are seeing a picture of hell, with all that excessive red on the screen. And another aspect about the editing that I want to point out is the constant freeze frames, which is a systematic narrative device used in Goodfellas while Henry is trying to, put into picture the story. Every time he vocalizes, this is when X or Y knew he fucked up. Like, the freeze frames, and from the way that I see it, and you might interpret this differently, but it is kind of like this movie wants us to make an alternative decision. Because in that one moment where the frame is frozen, it is as if we have an option to go back or say or do something that's different from the choice that you're about to make. And it might, improve your situation in the long run, or maybe it might make it worse. Who knows? But you're given a chance to back out. But in reality, the protagonist is making the choice anyway. So only you have the omnipotence of what the protagonist is going to do, and that's kind of, amazing. It makes us feel good when watching the movie. It makes us feel like God in a way. We get to watch these characters make, the choices, and we just get to step back. We don't interfere, we just watch. It's like you're on the street and the car is about to run you over, but then all of a sudden time ceases to function. Therefore, you're able to take your time and move out of harm's way. That to me reflects the artistic triumph of Goodfellas editing. It pinpoints monumental decisions. Another thing I want to discuss is Goodfellas acting and performance, because we talked about its plot and editing, But how about acting performances? Is it realistic enough for me to go, okay, this is convincing? Let me tell you what. If this movie only had one realistic performance, and all, the rest of the performance was mediocre or inferior to the other ones, I think that one performance would have been how convincing the rageful emotions were between Karen and Henry. So Karen, who is, Henry's wife, points a gun at him and tells him to wake up. It is not only incredibly filmed, but it's also well acted by the actors Ray and Lorraine. The moment when Henry wakes up in shock, it is as if he is coming to terms with his own death at the hands of his enraged wife. Perfect acting. Alright, I discussed the explicit plot of Goodfellas, the editing, constant freeze frames and choice of color grading, acting and performances. Now, how about the engagement factor? There are times where all this movie wants to do is engage the audience, even if it means resorting to shattering the barrier that separates the reality that the audience is in and the reality of the movie itself. Breaking the fourth wall, essentially. Especially in the third act. Throughout the third act of Goodfellas, the audience is at the edge of their seats while Henry is being followed by a helicopter. And at the same time, while Henry's being tailed, he has to finish selling off that cocaine so that he can go and have a fresh start. People who know the real story are acquainted with the fact that Henry Hill gets caught in the end or is in witness protection program, but yet they're still rooting for him to evade capture anyway. This level of engagement speaks volumes to the caliber of Goodfellas, because the fact that the audience roots for Henry Hills regardless of what he's doing, and the only way that the audience who knows the true story can, feel that way is dependent on the effectiveness of the filmmaking for Goodfellas. Okay, great. Explicit plot, editing, acting and performances, engagement factor. Are these elements enough for me to watch this movie again? Goodfellas does an excellent job of portraying an ambitious crime mobster, Henry Hills. And on top of that, this movie is filled with brutal scenes and demise, some comedy, self-narration, which elevates the film. I also want to mention that it had one of the greatest single shots that I've seen in filmmaking, because when Henry and Karen arrive at Copacabana, there are no cuts. It is almost like we are there in person, and considering that we haven't seen the location before, we are immersed into the wonder of that scene, and it leaves us scratching our heads and being like, really? Henry is respected that much? Like, I know that he's gone a long way, but wow. We don't expect to see Henry have that level of treatment. Maybe we do. It just depends on the audience. But I was like, okay. Alright then. On the other hand, I don't know if Goodfellas wanted to make the mobsters seem like rich morons that made miscalculated risks for no reason, because everyone starts walking in with a bunch of expensive clothes and cars and shit, and Jimmy starts raging at them, as Jimmy should. While I was watching that scene where all that is going down, it was like I wanted to tell those directors in their faces, have you heard of money laundering? Do you really want the feds to seize all of that wealth rather than just put all of that money into a shell company and then spend it all away? The legitimate, taxable way? That rhymes. I mean, what was the point of making the New York mobsters unstoppable if they have horrible decision making? Granted, this is based on a true story, so of course they must be caught to make Goodfellas an accurate depiction. But why not use some of that creative license and make them get caught with a bang? I am not convinced that these people were that stupid, especially considering that there is a huge time quota before the mobsters get apprehended by the authorities. And let me just tell you, there's that huge time quota for a reason. They were pretty damn good at evading the police. those people were nimble with it. They knew how to hide. They knew how to kill without leaving their tracks out in the open. We could see how they bury and dig up the bodies. They knew how to steal and bribe the cops to leave them off their trail. Like, no way they weren't smart enough to not buy expensive items out in the open, especially when they just got out of jail. I mean, how stupid can they be? To finish this off, I will say that despite my tiny nitpick of not utilizing enough creative license, which isn't actually a big deal, but rather that's just how I felt. Anyway, so despite that, I would definitely rewatch Goodfellas again, given the time, of course. It is an exceptional production. Every element that I've outlined in this movie review effectively conveys the narrative. Clear plot, rich acting and performances, high engagement factor, and of course, the ultimate verdict, which is the rewatchability factor. The Cinema Courtroom contends that Goodfellas is an amazing product of the 20th century, even when the cliches of bad character decision making can be unavoidable, and annoyingly vivid at times. Suffice to say that Goodfellas is a must-watch. Court is adjourned. You may be seated. And now we begin to approach the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show, which is the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing, you may ask? Well, I'm glad you inquired about this. In the first half of the Cinema Courtroom podcast, we reviewed Goodfellas, which is one of many films that I have selected, old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, the broken and the damned, black, white, brown, orange, and blue. Then, in the second half of this podcast, I assemble all of the leftover topics that pertain to the film industry in general. Movie news and movie relevant subject matters that aren't just limited to one specific movie and integrated into one post-sentencing hearing list. Perceive it as an after party that is long overdue, where you are invited, or in judiciary terms, an invitation to a retrial in order to rectify an unfair hearing. Because sometimes, like the organic sapien that I am, I find that I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. So, the majority of the time, my opinions do change after a rewatch or two, which means I am compelled to review it again in a post-sentencing hearing. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show. If you enjoy what you've been hearing in the first half of the Cinema Courtroom show and what I have to say about Goodfellas, if you haven't done so already, I would very much appreciate it if you give this podcast a reshare to assist the algorithm and like this episode by clicking the thumbs up or heart icon on whatever platform that you're listening on. Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel. This way, you will indeed be supporting the Cinema Courtroom, as well as its future episodes, installments, and assets. That being said, I salute you in advance for your generous engagement and support, and I hope you continue to join us in the everlasting ride to success. In this hearing, we are going to cover the following: how Sam Wilson as Captain America is different compared to Steve Rogers, Hugh Jackman making one last apparent return to Deadpool 3, and to finish it off, Avatar consolidating the box office again, and the reasons why the re-release of the first Avatar movie might boost interest in the sequel. Enjoy.
How does it feel? Like it's someone else's. It isn't. past. That's why it's yours.
Avengers Endgame was exhilarating, and one of the major things that stood out to MCU fans about Endgame was the ending, when Captain America passed on the shield to the Falcon, Sam Wilson. I myself think that scene is one of the most touching scenes of the entire MCU, where Bucky pulls Steve Rogers from the river in The Winter Soldier is the first most touching scene of the entire MCU, in my opinion. But regardless, Avengers Endgame and The Falcon and Winter Soldier, now retitled Captain America and the Winter Soldier, now streaming on Disney+, has confirmed that the mantle of Captain America is his, and his alone, essentially. Anthony Mackie, the actor for the Sam Wilson character, answers a very engrossing question though. How is Sam Wilson going to be different in contrast to Captain America and Captain America New World Order? Here is Anthony Mackie's answer, and I'm going to read it aloud to you so that we can discuss it right after we know the context. Anthony Mackie's words. Mine will be different. What you have to realize about Sam, he's a superhero who's not really a superhero. There's no secret serum. There's no this or that. I just have wings on my suit that I got from the military. Everything that I do as a common man. When you see me, you might think, oh, I can be a superhero too. Whereas if you look at Hulk or any of those guys, you can't compete. Alright, now this is something that fans should already expect. Steve Rogers had undergone a special program in Captain America the First Avenger, thus granting him a serum that enhanced his physical strength. The Falcon doesn't have the luxury of that. Although, one might argue that it's not a luxury if you are someone like John Walker or the Red Skull. I digress to say that Sam Wilson as Captain America is different, in a sense that Sam Wilson is solely reliant on his limited human capabilities to quarrel with his opponents. When you cut him, he is going to bleed. Shoot him in the face, he dies. If Sam were to drink 8 bottles of alcohol, he would get drunk and pass out in an instant. Sam Wilson has these mortal constraints, whereas Steve Rogers as Captain America didn't have these mortal constraints and was able to withstand the likes of Thanos in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. Now, here is where the verdict lies. While yes, we are aware of how Sam Wilson is going to be distinct from Steve Rogers as Captain America, we must reach this following verdict. Should Sam Wilson be different? Is it the right choice for him not to have the secret serum? Because, I mean, that's a valid question. Because maybe it might limit his action scenes a bit, considering that he's more of a liability. And if they choose to have no plot armor, he might possibly die. And are fans ready to say goodbye to the new Captain America this early? I mean, it's worrying. It's scary. Let me tell you something. I think that this divergence between Sam Wilson and Steve Rogers is what we need to have explored in Captain America 4. Because while Steve Rogers will always be the one and only original Captain America, audiences can't really relate to Steve Rogers like they might do with Sam Wilson, and much to their own disadvantage, because we know very well that we won't embody the same physique as Rogers, which means that we do have to work extra hard for the ladies. But whatever, Sam Wilson has the same physical limits that we do, and I definitely think that Sam having the same physical limits will enhance the level of engagement of the audience in the cinema, because the bottom line is that we will fear for Sam Wilson's life for the duration of that movie. Any time that he gets shot, we'll be shouting in our minds, not in the cinema, or I'm gonna actually smack you, but internally, we'll be yelling, "Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! We don't want the new Captain America to die!" And there might be so many incidents where Sam Wilson will get injured and have a bloodied face. The question I have for you now is, what do you think about Sam Wilson's distinction from Captain America? Let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom.
That has forced me to reach down deep inside.
And I have nothing. Yeah, just completely empty up here. And terrifying. But we did have one idea. Hey, Hugh, you want to play Wolverine one more time?
Yeah, sure, Ryan.
I want to let you in on a little secret. I didn't expect to cover Hugh Jackman making his return as Wolverine in Deadpool 3 as a segment of this podcast episode at all. It was originally going to be about Namor being confirmed as a mutant in Black Panther, at least until the announcement of Wolverine, the most iconic and far-reaching mutant of all, joining Deadpool, came out on the news, and I decided, you know what, Namor can wait. So too bad we're seeing Namor in less than 2 weeks. Sorry, months, anyways. Because I literally freaked out about Wolverine more than anything else. I had to take a few minutes to collect my thoughts and cool down at 4 a.m. in the damn morning. Now imagine my surprise when I watched a video of Ryan Reynolds confirming that the biggest mutant of all was going to make one more appearance on the big screen. Just one more time, mind you, in Marvel Studios in an entirely different timeline. So it won't reverse the ending of Logan. And in Deadpool 3. I want to go on record and say that this is one of the best comic book news I've ever heard. Like, ever. In case you don't know what I'm even referring to, Ryan Reynolds did a 81-second clip where he apologized for not bringing anything to D23 Expo. And I'll admit, we were a bit bummed out by that, but we weren't we weren't really mad at him, because Deadpool 3 hasn't even begun shooting. But then Ryan Reynolds said this. But we did have one idea. Hey Hugh, do you want to play Wolverine one more time? Jackman then nonchalantly responds, yeah, sure, Ryan. Hell yeah! Hell yeah! Hell yeah! I'm gonna say it one more time for good measure. Hell motherfucking yeah! And you know what? Screw punctuality and professionalism when it comes to this news. This is awesome. I want Deadpool 3 right now. Give us the goods, Marvel. We want it all. Granted, there is skepticism to be had about this news. For one, we don't know what timeline Deadpool 3 is going to be centered on entirely. We don't know where in MCU or when it's going to happen. We do know it's not going to happen at the end of Logan or post Logan, for all we know, and that's a big possibility. But they might somehow reduce the impact of the beautiful ending of Logan, because fans had to say goodbye to Hugh Jackman and Logan, but then having him show up in another movie, it's kind of like, did they need to do that? If that is truly the case, then forget my excitement for this news. If Deadpool 3 does not do a good job at adapting Hugh Jackman and giving his return the degree of respect it deserves, you'll probably get a more angry reaction if that is the case. And another thing, are fans ready to say goodbye to Logan for the second time? Because again, why lessen the impact of Logan? Logan is, I think it's the best comic book movie of all time. And I say this with all due respect to the Batman that was released this year. I say this with all due respect to X-Men Days of Future Past. And I also say this with all due respect to Avengers Endgame. But Logan has so many sentimental aspects. And I kid you not, there have been people that genuinely cried at the ending. That being said, is it really worth it to mess with the fans and have Logan just make a return in Deadpool 3? And in all fairness, Deadpool 1 and 2 did just fine commercial-wise without Logan. On the other hand, there is a whole lot of excitement to be had, obviously, about Hugh Jackman returning in Deadpool 3. Because Deadpool has a free pass when it comes to utilizing outlandish comic book concepts and crossovers, because it's mostly funny, meta, fourth wall breaking fiction. You're essentially allowed to, resurrect Iron Man if the plot of Deadpool demands it. So I mean, who knows? It might not be too much of a crazed notion if Hugh Jackman returns as Wolverine. After all, it is Hugh Jackman. What's not there to love? While at the same time, and I'm going to reiterate this again, there is a fair argument to be made about the reduced impact of the ending of Logan and all of that creative jazz when it comes to the screenplay. I just hope that they give Hugh Jackman's return as Wolverine and Deadpool some fastidious thought and creative governance. Otherwise, I think it won't only be disrespectful to the Wolverine character, but disrespectful to the comic book movie genre as a whole. The question I have now is, what do you think about Hugh Jackman's return as Wolverine in Deadpool 3? Do you agree with the assertion that it might blatantly lessen the impact of Logan? Because, let's face it, it might very well be the case if the screenplay isn't being handled by a competent writer. All we can do now is have faith in Marvel Studios to do the right thing and not reverse the impact of Logan's beautiful third act. Are you excited about this news, like I am, despite a bit of skepticism then and there? Were you even surprised to be hearing this news? Was that something you called a mile away? I was definitely surprised. But I want to know what you thought. You could let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Avatar has a sequel that is about to release this December. Oh no! I can't wait! What am I to do? Here's what you could do. The Avatar first movie has been granted a 3D IMAX re-release to give fans a chance to access the movie in its full, splendid glamour and wide resolution, enhanced pixels, and graphics. Now, according to 20th Century Studios, with $10 earned domestically worldwide, Avatar is once again consolidating the box office. It has been placed third on the box office charts. That might, and it probably will, get people interested in viewing the sequel. In this segment of the Cinema Courtroom show, I will be exploring why Avatar's re-release can accomplish just that in general, and not just because it is consolidating the box office. Winning the box office is definitely a big reason, but it's not the only variable. For one, Avatar is going to have to invigorate a crowd with their existing audience. Think, ever since the first Avatar movie has been re-released into global cinemas, there might be someone who hasn't gotten a chance to watch Avatar, and they, begin to glance at posters while taking a stroll in the mall for the first Avatar, or a billboard on the street advertising. They might maybe give it a shot, and if they enjoy the first Avatar, they'll then see the preview for Avatar 2 attached to it immediately, and will be excited for more Avatar in just 2 months. This is nothing short of a win-win situation that's unprecedented for 20th Century Studios and Avatar altogether, because they will stir up hype. It will make people excited at the prospect of seeing a sequel. Another thing, and this is precisely why Avatar winning the box office matters here in my list of reasons of why people will get interested in watching the sequel. Avatar will be able to generate a positive perception because of this colossal box office win. Now, here's something you need to keep into consideration. Movie pundits like me and you might have all the time and money in the world to watch movies. No question about that. But what about the average moviegoer that just goes to the cinema once in a while and does not have enough time to avail a movie that isn't positively reviewed or has consolidated large box office earnings? Do you really think that they're going to believe in a notion that box office don't always correlate to the quality of the average movie? They're not into such philosophies like me and you. These people have to wake up early to finish, I don't know, finding the cure for cancer, launching a rocket ship for NASA, constructing a bridge, representing a huge client. You know, maybe they're like Saul Goodman or something. They have a whole career ahead of them. And they don't have time to think about logical semantics when it comes to the art of filmmaking. But what they need to comprehend is one word: money. Money is an indicator of why a movie is good to them. Will they care about anything else? Of course not. And why should they? They want something that sells. I want something that sells. You want something that sells. We all do. Because chances are that our friends or family have watched a movie, and based on their positive or negative word of mouth, it will affect whether or not we are going to be interested in watching the next movie or even the first movie. Therefore, why shouldn't people get interested in watching the sequel if the movie has a cosmic level of positive perception? James Cameron is an amazing director. The cast is so good. Revolutionary CGI. 3D. Solid story. Potential people in the audience will hear those words being tossed around like a frisbee and might very well feel inclined to give the Avatar sequel a chance. The final thing that I want to discuss, and I kind of touched on this when I talked about Avatar constructing a keen crowd for the next upcoming Avatar sequel and generating hype, but I actually think that the re-release of Avatar will successfully appeal to demand for the continuation of the first Avatar movie. How many times have you watched a movie that you really enjoyed, or perhaps you watched it with a friend and you heard him say something along the lines of, "We want more"? It is in our nature as Homo sapiens to demand more. That is how we become rich, wrought wars, try to gain a sense of fulfillment, of fun in our sad lives. We demand more of anything that gives us a good time. Don't lie and say that you don't want more of something that you enjoy. I know you do. I sure as hell do. My point being, Avatar re-releasing that close to an Avatar sequel reassures the new audience that in only 2 months, not 5 years, not a decade, in just 2 months, you are getting what you demanded for. More, 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 more. You are going to be treated to an Avatar sequel. I mean, don't tell me that won't get them giddy about the very idea of having a next movie with that short of a time gap. You know, and with all of the rationale of why Avatar's re-release and dominating the box office will get people interested in Avatar 2, building a crowd, positive reception, appeal to demand for continuation of the first movie, and a narrow time gap in between the first and second movie, I now invite you to answer something for me in the comment section below. Have you watched the first Avatar film? What did you think of it? And if you did manage to watch the first one, are you at all interested in the second movie, which is going to be released this December of 2022? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comment section or at our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. We have now reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom show, where we critiqued movies. I had a lot of fun doing this podcast, so make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed episode 14 of the Cinema Courtroom, just as I do making it 2 times a week. I hope to see you guys again in the next episode, where we're going to talk about, yet again, another movie. As for what movie it's going to be, find out when the next and 15th episode of the Cinema Courtroom show launches this coming Tuesday on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and the Amazon Music platform. Thank you once again for listening till the end. I am your Galactic Judge, Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular, spectacular day. And happy Spooky Month.
Hello there.
Court is now dismissed.